Hi class, welcome again to another video on rehabilitation engineering. So we have been discussing the topics on our second unit. So in the last video, we had an introduction and we saw the history of how SS devices have evolved over the past few years. So let us move on to the human component now. So if you have a disabled person, I am a rehabilitation engineer. I am sitting in a clinic, and a disabled person comes and approaches me. So, as a rehabilitation engineer, I should be able to understand exactly what the impairment of the person is. I should be able to understand what are the what sensory inputs are available to the individual, and I should be able to analyze how can I use the residual function that the person has in order to improve their life? So, an individual using an assist device would perceive the environment, that is his or her surrounding, through the senses and react or respond to the environment through effectors. So what does that mean? So sensory input means perception, which is analyzing, which is the ability to interpret the incoming data. So now this incoming data could be something that we are visualizing, something that we hear, something that we feel, hot or cold sensation, or some smooth or rough sensation, or something, various colors, or some visual image, or some sound, or some buzzer, or anything. That is like interpretation of incoming data. Now, cognition means the problem solving ability of the human. Now, for example, if I'm riding a bicycle, I see a pit in the road, which is very common to us, isn't it? So I see a pit in the road or a hole in the road. So immediately, if I'm riding my bicycle at a very fast pace, my brain quickly processes the information. I perceive that there is a pit that is approaching, and my brain is processing, and I take a decision either to apply my brakes or I take a decision to go around the pit, or I mentally prepare myself to, ride the bike into the pit and face the consequences. That consequence could be maintaining my balance, that consequences could be, the after effect, like falling down. And then you have the movement control. So once I've made the decision that I need to apply the brakes, I actually need to make sure that my fingers are pressing the brake, right? So whether I should press the left brake or right brake or both brakes, and all these decisions my brain has already made. So now the brain is asking the hand to just compress the brake and apply the brake and stop the bicycle. So this is just a generic example. Now imagine instead of being on a bicycle, if you are riding a wheelchair or you're driving a mobility scooter, then you have similar decisions that you need to make. Now, if the person is sound enough to make a cognitive decision, if the person is sound enough, or if the person is in the right frame of mind to have this cognitive thinking and have this ability to make decisions and solve problems, then this kind of a system would work perfectly well for them, right? So you have a sensor, right? So you have the perception, cognition, and motor control that the individual is able to do, and then you have the effector, that is where you implement your plan, right? So in my case, the effector was the brake, right? The sensor was my eye because I just saw the pit, and then the perception, cognition, and motor control is done by my brain. This was the example from the bicycle. This was from the bicycle example that I just said. However, if the impairment is due to dysfunction of higher information centers in the body, then the decision making ability of the individual gets really affected. For example, if there is a person with stroke, right? So stroke often affects the person's ability to communicate. Now, we have discussed dysphagia, which is which is the problem in swallowing. So similarly, you have aphasia, where you have problems in formation of sentences. You have problems in communication. So aphasia as a result of stroke is a dysfunction. I mean, it's you can say that it's a speech impairment, but that speech impairment is something that is not due to the like malfunctioning of the vocal cord as it is in dysarthria, but it is because the brain is unable to form proper sentences, right? The vocal cord may still be functional enough, but the brain is just not able to make the decision. The brain is just not able to communicate. So the speech center of the brain is affected due to stroke. So in this scenario, right? So if you are not able to communicate, if your patient is not able to communicate properly, then it is very difficult to use an assist device that actually takes voice input, right? Voice operated wheelchair. I mean, imagine a person's not able to follow forms proper words, and you're rehabilitating them using voice operated wheelchair. That would be a disaster, right? So as a rehabilitation engineer, I'll have to be aware of what residual function are available and whether the assist device that I'm gonna use for that particular patient is actually feasible for the patient. Again, psychological conditions should also be taken into consideration while developing an assist device, because many people would not be psychologically fit enough to, have certain, to be able to use an assist device or to be able to use the interface that sometimes you just think that it is very very sophisticated device, and then you use a touchscreen ipad or something for that person to enter information. Now what if that person is psychologically so distressed that the sight of an ipad is actually stressing them out? So in that scenario you wouldn't want them to be able to use an ipad, right? Because the fact that they have something where they see the reflection in is sort of like affecting them. So you wouldn't want such patients to be. You wouldn't want these patients to use devices that actually stress them out. So also a person who has encountered sudden disability goes through quite a lot of sequence of stress, quite a lot of phases. So the first phase is actually shock. Often they are under the impression that this is just a bad dream, and then I wake up, everything's gonna be normal. That's the shock. And then they realize that no, this is actually true. This has happened to me. And then they end up being defeated or retreated. They just like, oh dear, this has happened to me, and then they're in denial, saying that no, 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 this can't be true, because they're just not able to accept that they're disabled. And finally, at some point, they just say like, okay, let's just move on. You know, okay, I'm disabled. Let's just move on. Let's just see how best I can, you know, use whatever is there, whatever is left, like whatever residual function I have, how best I can use and still do the things that I was able to do earlier. That only after the acknowledgement phase and the acceptance phase can a rehabilitation regime actually work. If a person is in denial, if a person doesn't want to accept that he or she is actually disabled, it is very, very hard to actually, or nearly impossible, and to actually encourage the patient to participate in the rehabilitation regime. Only when they have accepted that yes, they have this issue, can you actually treat them. So the psychology of the patient is also very very important.